Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys? Welcome to Castcast, and I am your host, Cassidy Strader. In an interesting bit of games this weekend, and we're getting to the final stretch, but still a good amount of playoff spots available. For each conference. Um, you've got three teams who are locked in on the AFC side, and then you have four teams that are locked in on the NFC side. You know, crazy things could happen, I guess. Some things probably, more crazy than others, but I'd love to see, what might happen, with this week. Um Without further ado, if nobody wants to, chat or anything like that, I think I'm gonna start us off, looking at the games. I think I am just gonna full cam it today, and I'm not gonna show my, screen or whatever I'm looking at, when I'm talking about these games, and we'll see how that goes. First game, obviously the only Saturday game, we have the Detroit Lions visiting the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, the Lions have clinched the division. The only thing about them is that they could potentially move up in the seeding. Three teams at 11-4, and also with the Cowboys lurking around at 10-5. We don't know who's going to be the number one seed, which is crazy to think about. Obviously, the main thing is that the Niners lost on Christmas, in a pretty hard, rough game for them against the Baltimore Ravens, who are kind of, I mean, you could say are the clear cut, but they have to play Miami this week, and there's just a lot of, you know, you know, uh, just variables into who's going to make it, I guess, and that sort of thing. Um, and the amount of teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention is only four in each conference. You've got Patriots, Titans, Chargers, and Jets in the AFC, and then Panthers, Cardinals, Commanders, and Giants in the NFC that haven't made it. Now, looking for this, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna talk about Lions playing the Cowboys here. The Cowboys undefeated at home. Oh, sorry, let me restart that. So we have Detroit Lions visiting the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys, where it's not any surprise to anyone, are undefeated at home because of their point differential, the way they've handled teams there. And the concern with this team is that, oh, this is a team that just doesn't do well on the road. 3-5 on the year on the road and against some not so good teams like the Arizona Cardinals, I guess, even though that was, early in the season, but it's still very concerning. And Detroit coming to visit Dallas after securing their first NFC North division title in the last 30 years. Um, Detroit still has many reasons to win because they could still be the number one seed. I think it's crazy to say, and I think that the Lions are probably very grateful, and Campbell probably realized that, oh, we're still in the hunt. We can still potentially be the number one seed, and the playoffs could run through Detroit, which it's not the hardest place to go play, I don't think, but you never know. It's been 30 years since they've potentially, you know, I mean, or I wouldn't say, and when was the last time that it ran through Detroit? The playoffs have probably never ran through Detroit in the NFC. I'm not a history guru. I don't know about that. But given that it's been 30 years since they've won the division, I'm assuming it's, probably never happened because it's not like Detroit is one of the old franchises of the league. But looking at this game, I think that Detroit can pose a pretty big problem for Dallas. And the reason for that is that even though Dallas came out and they really held the run game of the Dolphins last week on Sunday, which was a game where, oh, yeah, this is really going to test our mettle to see if we can beat a team above 500 and also on the road. And they came up short, and the Dolphins played just a little bit grittier than they did. But you had Detroit last week who won a close one against Minnesota where Nick Mullins threw for 411 yards. Now, that is one of the problems, I think. And I mean, not to say that I think the Cowboys can't put up that kind of yards, but I just think that Detroit, their defense has been really off and on. I just don't see them giving up that much 2 weeks in a row, even though, and it's pretty obvious, Dak Prescott is clearly a better quarterback than Nick Mullins. They've got what I would say a more well rounded talent around Prescott with Lamb and some of these other guys, on the team, like Cooks, their new tight end and that sort of thing. And overall, a pretty healthy team. Dallas, for whatever reason, hasn't reported yet on what their Thursday practice looked like. Clearly, they're not going to practice today because they play tomorrow. But the only injuries that I see that are, any relevance are potentially Tyron Smith being questionable. And then you also have Zach Martin did not practice on Wednesday, but he was limited on Monday. I feel like he's gonna go. Those are the only two players. I mean, I guess you have Malik Hooker, but he was a full practice on Wednesday, and nobody really else to me that is a huge contributor to this team. Not to knock them, but looking at the Lions, you have Brock Wright, James Houston, and CJ Gardner Johnson, who are all three of those are out. And the only questionable on the team is Cameron Sutton, who did not practice all week. Um, and all these other guys that they have here. I mean, the only one that's notable is maybe Frank right now, but he was a full practice Tuesday and Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday. But it does state here that it was because of rest. I'm sure that they want their star center to play. And I mean, Penei Sewell, who's been also, I think the highest grade tackle this year in the NFC, if per PFF, he was a full practice all week with a shoulder injury. I expect him to be able to go because him and Ragnow are what make this line elite tier. I think without those, I think it's a good O line, but not great. And, that the reason I kind of bring them up is because I think the Lions could really expose um the Cowboys run defense this week because they had a good week last week. But the thing is that Jahmyr Gibbs seems to slowly be picking it up. David Montgomery is just a powerful, strong back, and they can really limit the pass rush of the Dallas Cowboys by being able to run it down their throats. And I'm not going to give them the win just because I think that they do have too sketchy of a defense. It's too unpredictable to know whether or not they're going to play good. And I think looking at this game, Cowboys hosting the Lions, I think I'm going to go ahead and say the Cowboys are going to win. Um, and I'm going to say it's going to be a relatively close game. Excuse me. It's going to be a relatively close game where I think I think it's gonna be 31 Dallas to 28 Lions, because I think that the other thing with the, and I mean, they don't really give the Lions too much credit here. They only give them, under a 30% shot of winning this game. Um, but I think that with the way that their offense is built and that they don't really take too many deep shots, and you could even see the, like, the amount of catches their guys get for, I wouldn't say paltry yards, but they get a lot of catches for reasonable yards on the Lions. And, that's the kind of team they are. They chip away at you with the run, these dip and dunks with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the question mark to me is this defense. Can they prevent Dak from throwing excuse me, throwing and throwing dimes all game on them? Now, I don't think that they're going to be as bad, as they were against Nick Mullins, and they were able to get 4 picks on Nick Mullins. But this could be a game that, makes Dak look, I'll say it, a little bit better than he actually is, due to a weak defense in the Lions against the pass. Moving on, we have a huge game, at 1 o'clock. Dolphins and Baltimore. The reason why this is a huge game is due to the fact that Baltimore has a 1 game advantage on the Dolphins. They just came off an impressive win against the Niners, as everybody knows. I think that if they play like that, I think the Dolphins, it's going to be really tough for them. I heard the news that Waddle isn't going to be playing either, which just isn't going to help you. They're really going to be able to focus on Tyreek, limit him, make things tough for him. And you just got this pass rush that was merciless against, Brock Purdy. And Tua, to me, he's a bit better than Purdy in terms of his accuracy and all of that, in at least in my opinion. But you could say and it's nuts because, you got the Niners and you got the Dolphins, who just have really good prolific offenses. You can't really knock one or the other and say they're bad. They're both like elite tier offenses. But yeah, he does have a little bit better of weapons, in my opinion. Like in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Clearly, Waddle is not playing this game. But it's gonna be kind of a gritty game. You know, it is in Baltimore as well, and Baltimore clearly a team that, the Dolphins would want to beat. They could, really put themselves as a hot team that, you're not going to want to go play in the playoffs if they're able to beat Baltimore. But Baltimore just traveled to the Niners across the country and they handled them. I don't think, looking at the Dolphins, I don't think they're going to be able to run it very well because of the way that the Ravens are built, up front. And I don't think the passing game is going to be that easy. I think they're going to really need to be extremely patient, because um, even if, goodness, Kyle Hamilton doesn't play, I still think that, you got Geno Stone, who's a hard hitter and a young player and is hungry, that I don't think it's going to affect too much. Um, Looking here at the injury report, we have, yeah, another um another day where I guess it's Another day where you have a lot of guys who are, Jalen Waddle did not practice Wednesday and Thursday. He's already been declared out. His ankle's bad. Raheem Mostert did not practice on Wednesday and Thursday, and he hasn't been determined yet, I guess. And then looking at the rest of their team, I mean, you have Teron Armstead, who also did not practice and limited. You've got a somewhat banged up team. And even Tyreek Hill still has his lingering ankle injury. I don't think it's going to be a huge thing for him, because he played and he looked pretty good against the Cowboys when he got touches. And even Xavier Howard has an injury. Tua, has a left thumb and a quad, and the reason why that's kind of huge is he's a left-handed thrower, obviously. And just, this looks like a somewhat banged up team, and it's good that they were able to beat the Cowboys, but this might be one of those games that quickly gets away from you if you guys aren't playing full strength. You did have Kyle Hamilton, with his knee injury on a limited practice on Thursday. Isn't, game status is, they put a little dash on it. But it looks to me like this team, and then, I mean, Roquan Smith, with a pectoral injury, he was a full practice on Thursday. Patrick Queen, shoulder, full practice on Thursday. Looking at the rest of this, looking at the rest of their team, it's looking like they're pretty healthy. And to me, if Zay Flowers, he was a did not practice, I guess, for 2 days. I kind of expect him to be able to go. He's a tough little cookie, and I mean, I think it was even questionable of him playing against the Niners, but he did pretty well. I think that they're just resting him to make sure that he's ready for the postseason because they don't want to risk their top receiving threat at this point. But maybe they lean a little bit more on like OBJ, who is on the same team as like Ramsey, so he kind of knows him a little bit, kind of, brings some familiarity to the kind of defense that the Dolphins are maybe gonna, run a little bit and how, he's gonna want to operate to give some tips because it wasn't long ago that Ramsey and Odell were on the same team in the Super Bowl and they had that season together. But look into this game, I think that Baltimore's the healthier team. It is at home. The thing about the Dolphins too is that they haven't the only team that they beat was the other team that hadn't proved they could beat a team over 500. And that was a neck and neck game, that came down to a final game winning field goal. So looking at this, I do think that it could be a really close game. And, they only give it 3.5 point favorites to Baltimore. And I think that they could score, quite a little bit more than that based depending on how their defense plays. I think it could be very similar in the sense that like, Purdy's got a pretty good O-line and they couldn't protect him very, consistently throughout the whole game. And looking at this I think Lamar Jackson, he was just really hot. I don't think anyone wants to play Baltimore. Everyone seems to be talking about now Baltimore and the Browns looking as the two powerhouses in the AFC, and I couldn't agree more. I think that, this is Baltimore's game to lose, and they can further solidify that they should be the number one seed with a bye so that they're able to get healthy and be just a team that nobody wants to go play in the postseason. So I'm going to say I think Baltimore scores. I think Baltimore scores. I think they score 28 to 24 against Miami. I think that Miami, with all the injuries and their main weapons kind of being banged up, I think that they are going to fall short and not going to be able to score as much against this stout Ravens defense. Moving on, we have Patriots and the Bills. The Patriots coming away against Denver, which has led to, I mean you could say it wasn't even a thing, has led to the benching of Russell Wilson and his inevitable, what it seems to be that he's going to be cut, playing Bailey Zappi and him playing pretty well. They are at home, the Bills are, and the New England is visiting, obviously a division matchup. They do give the Bills an 87% shot to win, and I don't really think that that's, unfair because the Patriots were looking like a complete garbage team, before last week. And, they played a team that, many thought, oh, this team is in the playoff hunt. It's going to be a doozy of a game for the Broncos, but they looked pathetic in all honesty. They didn't play very good defense. Yeah, they didn't give up a colossal amount of points, but it's like against an offense like this that it's like, the only person you maybe have to worry about is Devontae Parker. But yeah, them going to visit the Bills, I fully expect Josh Allen to keep on playing well. The only thing that can beat the Bills, I think, in this game is themselves, is if Josh Allen or players turn it over. James Cook, has he's had some fumbling issues, but with both Buffalo kind of chasing Miami and also playing them the final week of the season, they're in control almost of their own destiny in a way, in the sense that Miami probably not going to beat the Ravens, knock on wood, but I think that, the Bills, kind of have an easier game, that's not going to be as insane, and they go and they win this one, and they definitely clean up some things against, a Chargers team that kind of made it scary for them last week, and I don't think they want to go through that again. Moving on, we have Falcons and Bears. Kind of an interesting game here because the Falcons still potentially playing for that NFC South, where the Buccaneers are the clear division winners right now, but they are a game behind in Tampa Bay. I mean, they could lose one of these games, in the final 2 weeks. We'll talk about them in a second. But the Bears, it's interesting. They could still make the playoffs, but it's like a 1% chance or whatever else, and they just won a game against Arizona. They handedly played against them. And the game before that, yeah, they barely lost to Cleveland. It was pretty crazy, but they've beat teams like Detroit and Minnesota in the last 4 weeks and even competed against Detroit in the last 5 weeks. So they're really kind of finding their own identity. And I've said that they've been a dangerous team. They've been a dangerous team later in the year here, where clearly they've kind of affected the trajectory of some of these teams. I'm sure the Lions would have wanted the game back. I'm sure that Minnesota would have wanted the game back, because they could have, still been holding a playoff spot theoretically, and could have been, you know, at least 500. Where right now they are 7-8, or maybe even above that, obviously. But yeah, this game they're given to Chicago actually, and I do think that that is a smart choice to say. Um, they say that the Bears have a little wiggle room. They literally don't have any wiggle room. They have to win out and have to have kind of a miracle for them to make it in. But I think that this team, along with like Justin Fields, is kind of trying to prove that they should be given, some level of competency to where they are brought back, next year. And I've been saying it. I don't think Fields is the problem in Chicago. They should not automatically dismiss him, as their quarterback of the future. I mean, they went up and they traded for this guy because clearly they saw something years ago. And I think that he does everything that you want a QB to do. He's the closest thing to me to a Lamar Jackson that we have after him, in terms of like his overall like running speed and then his arm talent. His play kind of reminds me a little bit of Lamar, just not as proven as him, obviously. Otherwise, we would be talking about, a potential, oh, he's like a dark horse MVP kind of candidate where he's, proven himself on that echelon. But I think that this game isn't going to be super high scoring. The Falcons do have a decent defense. I think that Fields is going to have to use his legs a lot. Um, the thing is that you've got, several injuries on the Chicago Bears. And let me see here. So yeah, on the Chicago Bears, Cole Kmet is questionable, but he's been playing. He didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday, and he was limited on Friday. But you also have Darnell Mooney who's out with a concussion. I know he's not your star guy, but then Lucas Patrick as well, O line, questionable going into the game with limited practices on Thursday and Friday. Otherwise, a pretty healthy team. Tevin Jenkins also in concussion, but he was a full practice all week. I guess they aren't saying that he's questionable or out. I'm assuming he cleared protocol or something like that. But yeah, several injuries on. They're giving Cordell Patterson rest. Chris Lindstrom has an ankle, but he was a full practice on Friday. Calais Campbell they rested, because he's up there in age. Obviously, Jake Matthews with a knee was limited on Wednesday and Thursday, but a full on Friday. Caleb McGarry questionable for this game. Another lineman, several linemen that are on the injury report here. And I do know that the Bears defense has gotten better over this year, which I mean, I think that their offense and their defense have both been steady in their improvements. I wouldn't say they've made leaps and bounds, but obviously them trading for Sweat, from the Commanders, has clearly kind of helped them, which doesn't surprise me because they really didn't have a bona fide like pass rusher that was going to be consistent and like a leader of this team. Looking at this, I do think I'm going to give the win to the Bears. The other thing that I think about too is they have, I think the a rookie corner. I forget his name, but he's like first in passing downs in all corners or something, and then like the QB rating when targeting him is also, he's got like the first rank because he's been the best this year, which is incredible. I think the Bears, they've drafted well. They just have to put it together. I think that they have, and they've traded well. I think that they've been making moves to try and, make this kind of time where, oh, people think the Bears suck and they could improve quite a bit, in the next few years if they stay on track. And the thing with Atlanta that I don't like is that Ritter just throws too many picks. I guess I don't know if he's even um let me see here about them, and let me look at their depth chart real quick. I think that, if Ritter is playing, or I guess it's Heineke, but the thing about Heineke is you kind of know that he's going to play kind of a gunslinger mentality, a huge Favre fan, and you kind of know what you're going to get with him. He's going to play some gutsy ball, but like I said, with a banged up O-line, he might be getting pressured a lot more to where he's not able to just escape the pocket for free. With that being said, I'm with that being said, I am going to say that the Bears win this game, and I think it's going to be a close game, and I think that they win 20-17 against the Atlanta Falcons. Sorry, Atlanta, but your playoff hopes are probably going to go away after this game. You They did pull off a good win against the Colts last week, but the inconsistencies of this team is the inconsistencies of this team just always worry me with their quarterback play. Moving on, we have Raiders Colts. The Raiders, one of these teams that can still, or I mean, sorry, cannot make it. Or wait, no, they can make it. Oh, sorry, if they win, they still only have like a 30% shot to get in. But playing Indy, a team that looked lost last week. Like, I thought it was kind of crazy. It was interesting to me how Jimmy said that Colts were the underdogs last week. And I'm like, I don't think anybody favored Atlanta. It's like this is a playoff team against a non playoff team in the worst division in football in the NFC South. And the Colts, I just don't know what happened. I'm not gonna lie. It's still baffling to me. I mean, I get that they're somewhat banged up, and it's like this is a team that's been maybe overperforming, but no crazy, no crazy like injuries on their team or anything. And even looking here, like Michael Pittman, concussion in shoulder, but he was a full go on Thursday. Game status is unspecified. Looking to the Raiders, there's really no one on here. They've had Max Crosby on the injury report the last like few weeks. I could really care less. Josh Jacobs is injured, but who cares? The way that the backup ran. I forget his name, to be honest with you. So no real injuries that are like holding the Raiders back. And yeah, Crosby looks like they've been taking it easy, but he comes out on game day and he's still a game wrecker. So it's kind of like, who cares? They do give the game to the Colts. This is in Indianapolis. And as far as I'm concerned, the Colts could still be playing for the division. So I do expect them to be kind of gutsy and really want to redeem themselves after last week. We do have the Raiders who just played against Mahomes. And it's like, they're going up against Minshew. I just don't see I just don't see how they can say the Raiders only really have a just under a 40% chance to win with a 3.5 point difference after how they've played, and I kind of expect them to, run a lot, and the strength of the Colts is them diversifying it around, but I just don't see yeah, I just don't see them really doing that well if a team like Atlanta can really give the Colts offense problems. I think that Max Crosby and that defense of the Raiders who's, playing better as of late, I just don't see them really letting up that much either. I'm going to say it is a low scoring game because I think the Raiders, they had the outlier game against the Chargers where they scored a shitload, but that was, due to a lot of turnovers they forced. So looking at this, I think I'm going to say Raiders 17 and I'm going to say Colts 13, is my prediction for this game, even though the Raiders, they say, are underdogs in this game. Um, Moving on, we have Panthers against Jacksonville. Jacksonville looking ridiculously odd and bad. Trevor Lawrence not looking good. It was one of those, games, their last game that they played against the Tampa Bay, where Tampa Bay, yeah, they're getting hot at the right time, which is why I say that, they're probably going to win that division because they have the most talent. And I mean, to me, with the talent they have, it is their division to lose. but playing playing this game, you just had Carolina who, you know, uh, threw all over my Packers, and it's like, yeah, Bryce Young did drop some pretty good dimes in that game and whatever else, and they just lost, but Jacksonville, it's just looking really, really tough for them. They don't really give the Panthers, any shot to win this game, surprisingly, but I looking at this, with the way that Lawrence is playing, yeah, he probably doesn't need to play perfect this game, but it's like they have goodness. But, you look at Carolina, it's like they had an off game for the running game last week. And, maybe this week, they don't run it a ton because Jacksonville's defense is stout against the run, but like I think that, Carolina could have a very opportunistic defense against a struggling Trevor Lawrence. And this is one of those games that is like probably the biggest trap game of the year. Jacksonville can win and and be like, okay, we can't go worse than 500, but we're not sitting cozy going into the postseason. Like I think it's the worst they've looked this late in the year in like the last few years, where it's like these last few years they've been, one of those teams where they can compete against anybody, even if it's on the road. And the interesting thing is that Jacksonville's worse at home. They're 3-5 at home. Yes, you got Carolina who's 0-8 away, but you know, it seems like the battle of the lesser of two evils here or something, in terms of like, oh yeah, this plays terrible at home, but they're up against a team that hasn't won an away game. Obviously, the Panthers 2 wins this year. Who knows? I am gonna say Jacksonville, but I don't trust it, and I'm only gonna say Jacksonville. They score 16-10. That is my prediction for this game because it seems like one of those games where it's like, how can you predict this? It does seem so off kilter for Jacksonville that it's like it would be a gimme to me if they instilled any sort of faith from last week, but they didn't instill any faith, last week. Now moving on, we have the Titans against the Texans. For many that remember, these two teams played a couple weeks ago, and it was a nutcracker of a game where it could have went to either team. Will Levis left the game with an injury after getting sacked like 8 times, I think. And the Texans, they won with I can't remember his name. Another one of these backups. Goodness, there's so many names floating around for QB this year. It drives me crazy. But I expect it to be another gritty game. These two teams, yeah, you got the Texans who got handled by Cleveland, but that's to be expected, especially when Stroud doesn't play. And then last week, the Titans, they barely lost to Seattle, and goodness gracious, who knows what's going to happen with this game? Let me look at, they give the game to the Texans. I think CJ Stroud is going to be back. So it is their game to lose, especially since it's at home and they're still, hunting for a playoff spot. But you know, Houston, they have Stroud coming back. It's his welcoming back game. They overall need to show that they can win this game because they're on the outside looking in. If they win, they have just over they have a 52% shot to make it per NFL.com. If you know, if the Colts don't play well in their game against the Raiders, the Texans could take their spot in this game. Or they could even, I mean, if Jacksonville loses, they could have the number 4 seed, which I think would be tremendous for the Texans. but in the division that they're in and the way that the rest of the teams have been playing, I personally think that the Texans are the best team in that division right now. As wild as that sounds, with the way the Colts played last week, the Jaguars have been struggling lately. If Stroud comes back and he looks as good as he was, the rest of the year, they are the best team. He is the most consistent play. He is the most consistent play out of any quarterback in that division, in my opinion. And it's like it wasn't too many weeks ago that we were talking about how Stroud, if this team was doing better, could have been an MVP candidate with how good he was playing. And he still has the best rookie campaign we've ever seen. And, going and looking at the injury report here, let's see. They have Stroud concussion, but he was a full practice on Thursday. I don't think he would really be a full practice if he wasn't going to play because, the Texans know and D'Amico Ryans knows like this is a must-win game. The season is on the line with 2 games left. Looking at this, we have Nico Collins had a calf, but he was full practice. Blake Cashman, was limited practice both days, and on, they haven't said on Friday what his in is. Laramie Tunzel, their star tackle, full practice on Thursday. Unfortunately, Will Anderson Jr. did not practice on Wednesday and Thursday here. And, you had, I guess, your star, a pretty good guard in Shaq Mason on limited practice on Thursday. But overall, I think that this team, if CJ Stroud comes back, they are going to rally behind him, and he's going to come out and he's going to play a game because he already looks like a kid who, is a 3rd or 4th year quarterback or something like that, in my opinion. Maybe even more advanced than that, which is crazy to say. But looking over at the Titans, they've got a lot of guys, on the injury report here. Let me look quick. Derrick Henry got rest, so nothing there for him. Will Levis was a full practice on Wednesday and Thursday. I'm assuming he's going to play. You've got Sean Murphy-Bunting, limited practice with his hip injury. DeAndre Hopkins is getting rest. That's no surprise at his age. Even though, I feel like he's not like anciently old. Caleb Farley, their young corner, limited practice on Wednesday and Thursday. But otherwise, looking at this, from what I can tell, not a ton of like super serious injuries. Like people are either, there's a couple of do not practices, but mostly limiteds and full practices. So a lot of guys on here, but I think a lot of smoke screens, in my opinion. I'm still going to give the game to Houston. They give them a 4-point advantage, which, I think is, pretty fitting. I do think that, if Stroud comes back, they score 28 points. And I think with a healthy Will Levis, depending on how the defense plays of the Texans, which I think it's been a little inconsistent. I think that they might score in my opinion, I think they might score 24 at the highest, but I'm going more for like a 20 points of scoring is what I'm going to say for them. So yeah, 28 to 20 final prediction for Texans visiting Houston. Moving on, we have Rams Giants. The Rams looking like a very hot team. They're one of the teams, of course, that I need either to lose one game in these final 2, assuming my Packers win out, but I just don't see that happening against the Giants. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Stafford, really distributing the ball really well. Puka Nacua, already, he's going to have probably over 100 yards receiving 100, or I mean, sorry, 100 yards receiving, 100 receptions in this game, and is inching. The only thing that is lackluster about Puka, in my opinion, is the amount of touchdown grabs he has. He only has 5. And I mean, but the yards is good, 1,300 yards. Could, more than likely have over 1,400 after this game. I The Giants, it's interesting because they just played Philadelphia, and they gave Philadelphia, some, like, we wonder, why can't we handle this team, you know, or anything like that. Like, why can't we handle this team? Like we should be able to, like the big brother be, bullying the little brother in the division, and then you have the Rams who, put up a good show against New Orleans. Yes, the week before, against Washington, they, let up a good amount of points. I feel like when it's like Washington has been clearly struggling, but you put up 30 against New Orleans, who has a pretty scrappy, defense, and you feel pretty good. Giants have a pretty good Giants have a pretty good, defense themselves, and I don't see Dexter Lawrence on I don't see Dexter Lawrence on their injury report, or never mind. Here he is with his hammy still. He was did not practice Wednesday and limited on Thursday and Friday. Like I've said all these other weeks, I'm pretty sure he's gonna go because he's played through it for like over a month now, I think. You have Lawrence Cager, the tight end, who's doubtful, probably not gonna play. Wandale Robinson, and then I mean you even have Saquon with his elbow injury, but he was a full go on Thursday and Friday. Um, but otherwise, no other notable injuries here. They do have Darren Waller, but I'm assuming he's a go. He played obviously against the Eagles last week, and those are the extent of like their injuries to me that are gonna affect the team the most. Adoree Jackson they list on here, but he was a full practice. So it's like, yeah, they really don't have any injuries that are like, noteworthy, where it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna be missing this key factor. But the Rams, they only have one guy on here. They have two, sorry. Trey Tomlinson, who has a hammy and did not practice, and then Joe Noteboom, a guard with a foot injury, who did not practice Wednesday but limited on Thursday. So, you know, looking looking at this game, obviously, no need to go into too much specifics. I just think that the Rams, knowing they can clinch a playoff spot potentially this week, and know a little bit more of who are likely to play in the postseason, or know what the scenarios are for next week. I think that they win this game soundly, visiting New York, unless New York, New York, I'm just plays scrappy like they did against the Eagles, which I'm sorry, I don't see it. I don't think you're gonna have an easy time running in against like the likes of Aaron Donald, and we all know that Saquon likes to pound it up the gut between the tackle and guards and up the middle. Um, but yeah, I think that the Rams are hot, and I think that they're gonna go to 9-7 after this game. And as for a score, I think that the Giants will give them some problems defensively. But I think that, the Rams, this is a 24-point game for them, and I'm going to say 17 points for the Giants. Moving on, we have Cardinals Eagles. The Eagles, getting an easy game here at home. They're 6-1 at home, and they play the Cardinals. The Cardinals, 1-7 on away, obviously 3-12 on the year. You don't have Marquise Brown. Kyler Murray is actually questionable. Surprisingly, it's odd. Darius Slay questionable and Zach Cunningham questionable. If I were the Eagles, I just wouldn't play Slay. You want him to be ready for the postseason, especially when you're going up. More than likely, if you make it past, the wild card round, you may and wild card in the divisional round, you you're probably going to end up playing a team like the Niners or, Niners, Cowboys, or, you know, yeah, or any of those two teams that are passing teams, you know. But thinking about this game, it's obviously kind of a trap game for the Eagles. I think that they need to come out and show that they can just win soundly in a game like this. I think that, you know, Hurts needs to if he looks the way that he did at the end of the game on against the Giants, I think that they smoke the Cardinals, but I'm guessing that they're going to look a little bit more in the middle. I still think that they're going to score 27, three touchdowns and a couple of field goals. And the Cardinals, I'm sorry to do it to you, but I think that you're going to score like 9 points this game or something like that. So yeah, that's my prediction for this game. And I think that, yeah, I'm saying that mainly because I think that the Eagles defense is going to kind of need to show that they can at least play really well against these worst teams. Saints Buccaneers, obviously a very huge game, a huge 1 o'clock game. These two teams are still playing for the division, because this division is so close knit. It's interesting to me that they actually give the advantage here to New Orleans. I'm not sure why on ESPN, and then, or I mean, ESPN Analytics says that they say that they give it to the Saints. Looking at the injuries here, Cameron Jordan is questionable. I'm sure he'll play. Olave questionable, and never good when your center. Eric McCoy is questionable. I feel like the center. You can see some really bad stuff happen when you have a backup center who, only has 1 week of practice, especially for a gritty divisional game. Looking at the Buccaneers, obviously last week they had Carlton Davis back, they had White back. They looked a lot more. They looked even. I mean, they obviously they made victims out of Jacksonville. I'll just say it. And I think that Derek Carr, with the way Lawrence has been playing, is going to play a little bit better. But I still don't think that he's really going to do well enough against a Tampa Bay defense that is really like scrappy, playing fast, a lot of energy. I just don't see it happening. And even though this is a must win for them, I just don't see them getting after Baker. And Baker has been playing really, really well. It turned it from, oh, Baker isn't your guy next year. You don't know who's going to be the QB to, oh, he deserves a contract extension in the last, couple weeks. Where it's like, yeah, you had a close game against Carolina 4 weeks ago. Then Atlanta was a close game, but then, he gets hot against, my Packers, first perfect passer rating ever visiting Lambeau by an opposing QB. And then Jacksonville. I will say this, I mean, I don't think he had to perform miracles or anything against Jacksonville, but he still played really, really well. So I'm gonna take the Buccaneers in this game. I think that they're gonna prove that this division is theirs, and they're gonna be the team to beat even going into next year. And I'm gonna say Tampa Bay scores 28, and New Orleans, I think they may struggle, to be honest with you, and I'm gonna say they're gonna score 17. I don't think it's gonna be that close of a game. Honestly, I think Carr has the potential to make some mistakes, even though he hasn't. I mean, he's thrown 8 picks this year, which is, respectable for him because he's definitely thrown more in previous years where it's like, man, you've got to stop with the turnovers. But yeah, overall I think Baker lights up the Saints this game. Moving on, we have Niners Commanders. Obviously the Niners obviously, they have this headline here. Chase Young returns to Washingtoners with the Niners. Plenty motivated. Does he really need to be that motivated though against Brissett, who, has been named the starter after Howell had a poorest performance last week? I mean, you could also say that Purdy had a poorest performance, but one of those the thing about Purdy to me last week is that he was playing fine. He's playing perfectly fine besides the interceptions. I mean, I remember the first drive that he did that dumps it to Kittle on an accurate throw, and Kittle just, who isn't the fastest tight end, but is just like running down the field, for a huge gain. And then it's like, just a little things that are a little off timing with his team. I'm not sure what was going on. Then he gets kind of hurt and they plug in God, why can't I remember his name? The former Jets number 2 pick. Gosh, why can't I? Sam Darnold. Yeah, Sam Darnold is his name. But overall, you look at here, Trent Williams is questionable, Debo questionable, Jennings questionable are kind of the notable injuries I see. Are the notable injuries I see for them. Let me go look at the injury report here real quick. Um, Eric Armstead has been, he's been hurt for a while now. I don't expect him to play. Looking at the rest of their, thing here. So Trent, it's a groin. He was limited on Wednesday and Thursday here. They don't specify what his status is. They're resting McCaffrey. I think it's smart. I think it's smart to go into the postseason fresh with all your stars. Debo, it's a neck. He was limited in practice Wednesday and Thursday. Purdy, though, was a full practice, even though it's his left shoulder, which if it was his throwing arm, I would go with Darnold. I'm not going to lie. I think Darnold looked pretty good for a guy who's been, moved around quite a bit. And maybe he just needed the right system because obviously the Jets didn't have a good system, is why I think he was out of there. The Panthers, the same thing. And now he's with a guy like Shanahan who can really actually like make him his best and make him a potential player teams may want to go for down the line if their current QBs don't look for. But yeah, if it was Purdy's throwing shoulder, I just wouldn't even think twice about it in my opinion, because whenever these QBs have their shoulder their throwing shoulder involved, they just don't look right. They make some passes, but then they also just completely botch other throws, and it's just way too odd. But yeah, Purdy, maybe, I mean, just because you are going up against Washington, it should be an easier matchup. I think your defense is going to get after Brissett quite a bit because even though Howell's not the most mobile, he's way more mobile than Brissett. And you've got Bosa and Young going after him. And it's just, yeah, looking at this, there's no injuries here that make me think that any of these guys are going to miss any time, and looking at the Commanders, you have, yeah, not really any injuries to me that are that scream they're not gonna, that, you got Charles Leonard Jr., I guess, who didn't practice because he has a calf injury. He doesn't play. That is also huge. It's just gonna be harder on the next guy up to protect for Brissett. But yeah, this game is probably going to be a doozy for the Niners, and it'll be a nice kind of recovery game after their beating from Baltimore. Going with this game, I am going to say the Niners score 31, and I think that the Commanders, goodness, I think that they score like 16. They get like a touchdown and a few field goals potentially. Maybe that's even generous. Maybe they only score 10 actually. 31 to 10 is my prediction for this game in favor of the Niners. Moving on to Steelers Seahawks, another kind of big game. You have Mason Rudolph starting. Kenny Pickett isn't happy about it, but it's like, dude, you had the majority of the year to kind of learn and play with these guys, and you looked subpar. Even after the firing of Matt Canada, you still didn't look you still didn't look, that good. It all right. Or wait. Or yeah, no, after firing Matt Canada, you did not look any better. You still looked like the same kind of guy, putting up the same amount of points a game. And this defense is finally kind of playing tough and they're playing raw the way that Steelers D is meant to be played. And I think that they definitely have the defensive talent to, cause some problems for teams if they make the playoffs. And this is a game obviously against Seattle that Seattle, Geno Smith comes back last week. He plays well. Overall, they get the win against, Tennessee, even though it was a lot closer than I think anyone would care to admit. But you're also 2 weeks removed from beating Philadelphia in the exact same kind of scoring game, and it's kind of crazy to me that it's like, yeah, the Seahawks defense has definitely been kind of showing up these last couple weeks. I think the offense, they have. I feel like a broken record saying this, but they have so much star talent. They should be scoring more than 20 a game, But the Steelers looking lights out against Cincinnati, making Cincinnati really hurt and be like, oh yeah, we're really sad, that this happened to us this week because you know you you have too much the Bengals, it's like you have talent and you should have been able to make it a game, but Mason Rudolph came in and I guess, looks like, kind of a relaxed quarterback who isn't going to force a lot but is going to get guys the ball when they're open. A kind of reserved kind of, play style, and Pickett isn't happy. He says he's ready to go. He was a limited practice all week with his ankle injury. But I say they play Mason Rudolph, and it is unfortunate that Minka Fitzpatrick is out, but it's bizarre. When he came back, they didn't look like a better defense. So it's like, who knows? Maybe the chemistry gets screwed up because defense, it's all about your weakest link, and Najee Harris has a knee injury, but he was a full practice Friday, isn't even listed as questionable. But overall, I think this Steelers team is ready to kind of go out and prove that maybe they belong in the playoffs. And if they come and they play the Seattle, who's on a 2-game win streak, and they play like they did last week, I think they take the game away. The thing with Seattle is that they've been playing really good defense, but I still there's just something about them that I don't trust. And I mean, it might not even be their defense, but it might be their offense because I feel like their defense either plays really, really, really well, or sometimes they have these games where they just start getting exposed, which is just bizarre to me. And looking at their injury report, they have a ton of guys on here. Good lord. Um, Kenneth Walker has in practice all week. JSN, was a full practice Wednesday. He's gonna be ready to go. Um, Tyler Lockett resting. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything to me. And looking at the rest of these guys, I guess you got Jamal Adams with a knee, and he was limited in practice Wednesday and Thursday. But They're resting Frank Clark as well, to be ready for this game. I personally think that I'm actually going to give the game to Pittsburgh because I think that they kind of proved that they are a hotter team with the one win over the Bengals, who I think that like the Bengals, they're not a pushover of a team, but like, the Steelers took it to them, saving their season last week because they if they lose that game, they're probably out of the playoff hunt. So I'm going to take Pittsburgh in this game because if Rudolph, does what he did last week, I think that they can win this game. They give, a 67% advantage to the Seahawks, and it is in Seattle, but I think Pittsburgh just has the kind of gritty team. Uh, the thing, but the Steelers have kind of the gritty team that I think that the Seahawks just aren't ready for. To be honest with you. And, so I'm going to pull for the underdog in this game, and I'm going to say the Steelers, they're going to score 24, and I think that the Seahawks score like 17 or 20 because they've scored that the last 2 weeks. It'll probably be a change of pace, but their offense seems to be capped out, and I just don't understand what the problem is with it. But yeah, in favor of the Steelers. Bengals Chiefs. This is nuts because the Chiefs, they can secure the division this week. They play at home, even though they're 500 at home, which is, asinine. It hasn't been a good day for them. They just lost to Vegas, who I think, has a bit more of an impactful defense on the quarterback in terms of like pressure and scheming. Cincinnati, I think, is one of those defense that they're scrappy and they can have, splash plays, but they're just like kind of they're a sneaky good defense that, I think is missing a couple of pieces to really bring them into that realm of being great. And they just got stomped by Pittsburgh. Kansas City, this is one of those games where I'm just like looking at it and I'm like, who wins this game? Who in the world wins? I don't know who to say. I'm not going to lie. You look at this and they give a 72% advantage to the Chiefs, but that seems a little bit high with how just riddled with problems this team has had this year. And I flat out just kind of don't know. I flat out just kind of don't know about, what's going to happen in this team. I think, looking at this, you have Jamar Chase, who is questionable. If he plays, yeah, good for the Bengals. I'm almost inclined to lean and say the Bengals are going to win this game. They took a hard one on the nose against Pittsburgh. And I think that with the way that their defense plays, I don't think that they're willing to go out and kind of, let it get blown up, and this was supposed to be the Burrow Mahomes matchup that we wanted to see, from like last year, but the Bengals were also they had a 3-game winning streak against teams like Jacksonville, Indy, and Minnesota, who were all playing pretty well around the time. You couldn't say, Jacksonville, from 4 weeks ago was definitely playing way better, and this recent stuff with them has only happened the last couple weeks. But if Bengals can harness that energy and go back to the way they were playing against those like pretty decent teams that aren't just pushovers, I think they beat the Chiefs. And I think they have, and it's the thing with Chase coming back is it's huge because Snead had a huge game where he was, on Devontae. And obviously the thing is that the Chiefs couldn't even stop the run last week. It was crazy how bad they were against the run for whatever reason. The Bengals, I think, have, a pretty good run game. I think Mixon is still one of those, could have, good players that could have a really good, rushing game this game. Yeah, I think, even with the Chiefs, they say having a close to 73% chance to win this game, I'm going Bengals. I don't trust the Chiefs with a 10-foot pole. They, I don't know what's wrong with them. I just don't. And it's like, is it all this? Do I don't know if it's all this, media publicity or whatever with Taylor coming to all their games and Kelsey and whatever else. But if it was really, 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 really affecting the team like that bad, wouldn't Kelsey just ask Taylor not to come to these or that sort of thing? Who knows? I mean, maybe. I mean, she seems to like coming to the football games, but who the heck knows if that's what's really screwing this team? But it's like it's really bizarre, But their problems were starting before Taylor and Travis were even a thing, which seems like an age ago now. But I I don't know what's wrong with the Chiefs, and I just don't trust them. I don't trust the offense or anything. And the Bengals, they're fighting for a playoff spot still. They need to win this game. They lose, and it is over. It is are more than likely over. I think a 9-8 record, could sneak you in, but right now they're on the outside looking in. So I predict, and I mean you look at the Texans, the Texans they're behind the Texans apparently. Same record. And then you look at the Steelers who could win, and it's just crazy, but yeah, they need to win this game. And I think that this is a game that they come out and they're like, yeah, we're going to win because we don't want to be knocked out. We want to, show that we are still a pretty good team without Burrow and that they could be an elite team next year that nobody's going to want to play. So I'm going to go with Bengals, and I'm going to say Bengals 24-17 Kansas City. Because I think it's impossible to hold Mahomes to no touchdowns, you know. But yeah, 17-24, a 1 point difference in favor of the Bengals. Looking at Chargers Broncos. Now this game is one of those where it's like, who the heck knows what's going to happen? They do favor the Broncos, which I agree with. I agree that they should favor the Broncos here. It's kind of crazy, but I made a video regarding my thoughts on Russell Wilson. But, the even crazier thing about it is, I mean, we got this information today that it's backup against backup, obviously. You have Stidham. Stidham is your quarterback on the the Broncos. And then you have Easton Stick on the Chargers. Now, obviously the Chargers just got, they played a scrappy game against Buffalo, I think, after taking a colossal loss against Vegas, a couple weeks ago. And the Broncos just lost against New England, after also getting plowed by Detroit. And their last win coming against the Chargers. So the last 5, the only teams that the Broncos had played were against, that they won were against Cleveland, which, it's impressive that they beat them, and then they somehow went on this losing streak, with the way the Browns have been this year. But the Chargers when Herbert got hurt. So, you're as a Chargers, or I mean as a Broncos fan, you're kind of thinking like, damn, dude, like, we should have been a playoff team, against these teams. And looking to this, Jerry Jeudy had a comment about Stidham and said, and he, to me, you look at Denver And it's like they've got good weapons, they've got a decent offense, but their line is still questionable. I don't know how fresh Stidham's legs are going to be compared to like, Russ's, who, still runs kind of well. But I think that the pressure could get to Stidham. But Judy did say he throws a good ball and he makes the throws that any QB, needs to make. So it's like, if that's true, I think this is Denver's game. But with how Los Angeles has been playing scrappy, and obviously this team is kind of rallying behind the coach over there. I'm actually going to take the Chargers. I think the Chargers, it's going to be one of those things that I think it's going to be one of those games where it's like, oh yeah, let's just play scrappy for the sake of our coach and the guys that we have. You do have Keenan Allen missing practice on Wednesday and Thursday with a heel injury. Limited practice from Bosa with his foot injury. They have an asterisk here. What does that mean? Well, they have an asterisk by Bosa, but maybe it's because he's still on IR or something. I have no idea what it means. I haven't seen that on any of these other people, but Kenneth Murray did not practice. Josh Palmer with his concussion did not practice. Would suck if they missed him. Um, but otherwise, looking at the rest, Rashawn Slater was a full with his ankle on Thursday, but limited on Wednesday. And this is a team that I think is trying to rally and show that they are a team that of players that can still play and be feisty, and that their head coach truly was letting them down, type of thing. So I think that this could be a scrappy divisional game. It is at Mile High. Justin Simmons, I'm looking at the injury report here, has an illness, did not practice on Thursday. They didn't even list him on Wednesday, interestingly enough. But Marvin Mims with a hammy, limited practice. Looking at the rest of their team, there's Cortland Sutton, I guess, with his concussion. He did not practice. Hopefully he plays, because otherwise you really have a depleted wide receiver core that consists of like Judy and Marvin Mims with his problem, and Cortland Sutton, and then I think wasn't there one more? No, that was it. Oh, I guess there's a tight end. Manhertz is hurt, and Greg Dolch is also hurt. Hamstring foot, did not practice. So it's like a very depleted Denver offense. Where I think that, like, if you have Mike Williams on the Chargers, just let him play. You know, So yeah, with this, I think I'm gonna go. Even though they say that it's the Broncos game by 3.5 points, I'm gonna go Chargers, and I think the Chargers can win this game. I think that they can win this game 24-23. To be honest with you, because I don't trust a new QB just going in and getting thrown into the fly. When Easton Stick played pretty well against Buffalo. So moving on to the night game of New Year's Eve, we have my Packers playing the Vikings. They give my Packers. It's obviously a rematch, and if we remember, the last game, the Vikings owned my Green Bay Packers. It wasn't a pleasant game. The offense was still struggling of my Packers. The It was interesting because it was the game that Kirk got hurt, unfortunately, and put kind of a damper on the Vikings, which has led them to this QB carousel where they have played Dobbs, they played Mullins, and then they also played is it Jaron Reed? Jaron Reed, who is, their starter this week. I have no idea what to think of what will happen in this game. Jaron Reed didn't look terrible in the time that he played. He did have a fumble from like Preston Smith and that sort of thing. This one is in Minneapolis. So like the elements won't be a factor at all. And it's a must win for both teams because if either team loses, looking at the playoff picture, it's like if the Vikings lose, it's 4%. If my Packers lose, we got a 1% shot to make the playoffs, and everybody knows that. The it's kind of, oh my goodness, it's nuts to think about. It looks heavily scripted, you know what I mean? Where, oh yeah, we've got these two teams that are 7-8, and they're both in the North after a game where the Lions clinched the division. They can't do anything worse than a 4 seed. But looking to this game, the thing that I worry about is it's like you have Justin Jefferson, who I don't really think it matters who throws to him. Had a scorcher of a game last week against God, who did Detroit, and they obviously lost. Mullins apparently 411 yards and 4 TDs, or wait, or no, 3 TDs weren't enough to really save him because he had 4 picks in a game where if they beat Detroit there, then they ultimately probably control their own destiny, in all honesty, and they're favorited for this game. But hmm, you look bad with how many turnovers there is, and it's like you're plugging in this 25-year-old rookie who has played such an insane limited amount of snaps. And I don't like to toot the Packers horn, but it seems to me like whenever we've had any of these games in the division where we get whooped, we come back and we're like, "Oh, this is the revenge game." Later in the year, the same thing happened with Detroit. Nobody thought the Packers were going to beat Detroit the second time around. Like, oh, Detroit smacked these guys around the first time, and then look, the Packers smacked them around. And even though Jair Alexander is suspended, I personally don't care that much. I think that Valentine has been playing scrap, and he's got the same kind of mentality as Jair. Obviously, probably not as skilled as Jair at this point, but I think with Eric Stokes having played I think he played pretty well last week. He wasn't targeted a whole lot. I think Stokes could, maybe follow Jefferson, has a good height with Jefferson, good speed. Maybe not. I'm sure Barry won't do that. I don't know what Barry's going to do because, like last year, we were somehow able to, snuff out Jefferson in the second game. But who the heck knows with this year and this defense? That I'm worried that the Vikings offense could look just as good, just as gougy as they did last week. But if it's minus the turnovers, this could look a lot like when my Packers played the Buccaneers, where it's like, oh yeah, the amount of points that we gave up, was just insurmountable. We couldn't win, and this is how our season ends, which would be just miserable, especially on New Year's Eve. Man, I don't remember, New Year's Eve's games. The whole world's gonna be watching, but then the one thing that I will say is that there are some players on my Packers that have been getting healthier and could potentially play. Looking at the injury report for this game, I think obviously there are a couple guys that I think are doubtful to play. That being Musgrave, Campbell, and then Christian Watson and Emmanuel Wilson probably, even though I guess he was a full practice all week. Dontavian Wicks seems like it's gonna be something where he's not gonna play. But guess what? Even with all these injuries, we still got guys like Romeo Dobbs. Jaden Reed looks like he's gonna play, after missing, I think, last week. Uh Tucker Kraft, who has been balling out, and And then you also got Elton Jenkins, who was a worry, but he has practiced the last couple days in limited capacity. And it looks to me like this, you know, this whole team is just kind of ready to play scrappy with how banged up they are. And with the Vikings, the most unfortunate thing for them this week was that Hawkinson is likely out the rest of the regular season at least. And so really it's got to be the Justin Jefferson show. Even even Madison with his ankle injury, he was limited on Wednesday and Thursday, and then on Friday full practice on. But then you also have Addison, the rookie wide receiver, who was limited in practice on Thursday and Friday and did not practice on Wednesday. So interesting news here. The thing that I'll say too is that I think that Love has been getting pretty good protection, so I'm knock on wood, I'm hoping that we can kind of protect him from Danielle Hunter and he can start to make these throws. He has been playing very, very well. I wouldn't say he's hot or anything like that, but I'm saying he's been playing very, very well with, very minimal turnovers over these games, which we've needed because, with turnovers, some of these games are likely losses, to be honest with you, and the Packers are out of the playoff hunt. But I think that this game to me is looking like it's going to come down to the wire. I really don't, there's no way I can say that we're going to take the Vikings out of it unless the defense plays like how they did against Jaron Reed when he came in and they forced a fumble right away. But even then, he was still like 304 with decent yards or something like that besides his fumble. But it's the one thing that I don't think I know. I don't think I know like how it's going to affect the game. Obviously, the Vikings head coach must believe in him for him to play. And then you've got, Jefferson who's come back good as new and just doing Justin Jefferson things. I think in order for the Packers to win this game, you overall have to have a very dominant run game to keep him off the field and sway the time of possession in favor of the Packers. And then to do kind of what we've been doing offensively, where it's like not a lot of chunk plays, to be honest with you, but take them when they're there and then do a lot of kind of running plays. So for my verdict for this game, I think that my Packers win. I'm going to say I think it's going to be like a 28-24 victory or something like that in favor of my Packers. But those are my picks for this week. Obviously, like I said, a lot of interesting predicament games for the playoff hunt. And just overall, I think that it's just going to be, kind of a gritty game. This is going to be one of those games where it's like the Packers may win 28-24, but they more than likely might be like behind at the end of the game, in my opinion. Like it could be 24-21 or something. And I mean, they may even go into like overtime where it's like a 27-24 game. But overall, I think it's, God, it's crazy that it's come to this, I guess, in this season for my Packers. Um, if any of you guys wanted to voice your opinions, though, now is the time. Otherwise, I'm likely gonna end the podcast here, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday to kind of, go over these games. To go over these games and the reactions because we don't have a Monday night game. But yeah, if there's nothing you guys want to say or any opinions you want to make, I, will thank you guys for watching. And as always, go pack go.